So this is session 14 of our Revelation study, and I always like to throw this slide up first in the beginning, the outline of the book. We've been through it all. We are in the which follows after the churches. So, the stuff that's most relevant to us as Christians is chapter 2 and 3. That's why we spent so much time there. We spent, like 6 sessions, 5 or 6 sessions there, like half of our time almost there, because it's relevant to us. This stuff just tickles our ears and it's interesting, and it is definitely interesting. We do want to understand it because we need to be able to give an answer. We need to understand, the give a reason for the hope that lies in us because we know what's to come and what's to come in the future. And this verse in Revelation 4, after this and be hereafter. So he's taught the metatauta verse, after these things. And so after the rapture of the church, these things. And we talked about the seven seals, but remember, we had a prelude, or I mean, an interlude last time where we paused and had that parenthetical pause that we talked about and went through chapter 7. And that was when God was sealing the 144,000 Jewish evangelists. And that was also when lots of people were being martyred for their faith during this time between the sixth and seventh seal because of all the death and destruction going on. But there was a pause in heaven, and there will be another pause coming up in the near the end of the trumpet seal. What we're going to have, what we're about to do when we get into chapter 8 here in just a second, I want to do a little quick, finish this little brief discussion. But when we get into chapter 8, we will see the seventh seal broken, and that will unleash the trumpet judgments. So the seventh seal comes after the global upheaval. As I've already mentioned before as well, the groups of signs, and if you take the Revelation signs and lay them on top of what's in Matthew and in Luke, it's very clear Jesus and the apostles are all talking about John are talking about the same thing. Um, this verse in Revelation stands out to me before we start chapter 8, even though I'm going back to Revelation 6, because in Revelation 6, this is where I get my tie into the book of Joshua, because the kings and the people of the earth cry out in Revelation 6, rocks fall on us. Hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of wrath has come. And who is able to stand? Well, we find out who can stand because it takes us into Revelation 7. But mountain rocks fall on us. When I go to Joshua, and I'm going to show you a couple of things in a second with Joshua, the very same words are in Joshua. Rocks fall on us. The kings of the earth are running from God, and we'll get there as we get into the trumpets. But as we move into Revelation chapter 8, the seventh seal is now about to be opened. And when he had opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. And I saw the seven angels which stood before God, and they were given seven trumpets. So these angels now are being handed these trumpets. I guess they're handed to them by God. I don't know. It doesn't really say. It just says they were handed trumpets. But it's interesting because he opens the seventh seal. And when he opens the seventh seal, it's not like anything happens right away. There's silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. Now that intrigues me because we think about heaven and God being outside time. So this gets way outside there, but how does John have any connection to time here? Because John's is like, I guess he's able to calculate this in his mind as this is all happening, because he said there was silence in heaven for about the space of half an hour. The angels didn't say that. Jesus didn't say that.
Is he
John.
there? Is he there?
Well, he was remember in Revelation 4, he was caught up. So is he in a vision, in a trance state, or was he actually caught up into the heavens? I don't know. I don't know that we can figure that out. But whatever he's observing there, there's silence for some period of time that he's calling half an hour. So the seventh seal gets broken, and the seventh seal, within the seventh seal, are the seven trumpets. And this is not the same. You know, some people like to try to say these trumpets have to do with the last trump in Corinthians, where he says at the sound of the last trump, the dead in Christ shall rise first. And that's why they try to place the rapture here in the tribulation. But the problem with that, as I've already said, that you saw in Revelation 6, he said, hide us from the wrath of the Lamb. Well, that's the wrath of God, in my opinion. And so that goes against the scripture where he says we are not subject to his wrath. So I don't think that that has anything to do with the rapture, or that First Corinthians is talking about that. We'll get into that a little bit later in the study with what I think First Corinthians is. But for now, I'll leave it that. But the seventh trumpet, the seventh seal, it doesn't, no trumpets are blown. There's silence, and then the seven trumpets are handed out. So as we move into Revelation chapter 8, the trumpet judgments begin. And these things are intense. But they're nothing compared to what's coming after this. Now, the trumpets are interesting, and the silence in heaven is interesting. And this is where I like to draw my parallel with Joshua and the book of Revelation. The interesting thing is Joshua's name is basically a variant of Yeshua. Not saying Joshua was Jesus, not saying that at all, because if you remember, and you probably read this, Karen, and I know the girls have probably read this in the past, in Joshua chapter 5, Joshua, they're getting ready to cross the Jordan. And Joshua's standing there, and he's getting ready to, they're getting ready to cross into the promised land. And it says the angel of the Lord showed up to Joshua. And when we see this word, the angel of the Lord, it doesn't really mean an angel per se. And I'll show you why in just a second. Because when that angel shows up, let me find it here. So the other interesting that they had to circumcise and then be healed and all that stuff that happened toward the end of Joshua 5. But after they crossed the Jordan, it says the day they crossed the Jordan, the manna ceased. So God had been basically doing everything for them until they crossed over into the promised land, and now it's theirs to possess and gain their inheritance. But when Joshua was there near Jericho, he lifted up his eyes, it said, and behold, a man stood opposite him with a sword drawn in his hand. So Joshua was kind of freaking out here because this entity shows up, and Joshua says, "Are you for us or our adversaries?" And it's an interesting thing that Joshua said, because Joshua's like basically saying, "Hey, are you on our side or their side?" And I think Joshua was being kind of arrogant here to say that with this entity that showed up, because he's talking to an appearance of the Lord, and he's like, "Hey, are you on our side or their side?" And instead, I think the question when Joshua should have asked is, "Hey, what can we do to be with you in what you're doing here?" Instead of Joshua thinking it was about them, because they had no chance without God. It's just my thought on that. But he said, so a sword drawn in his hand, and Joshua said to him, "Are you for us or our adversaries?" And so he said, so notice what he says. He says, "No, but I am the commander of the armies of the Lord," or the angel of the Lord, as you sometimes see it called, "and I have come." And then Joshua, it says, fell on his face and worshiped. That's key right there. We are commanded to never worship angels. You remember John, you'll see later in Revelation, John tries to do it. He tries to bow down, and angel says, "See that you not do that, because I am a fellow servant just like you." This case, This angel, or what is the angel of the Lord, is not saying, whoa, 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 don't bow down to me. He's allowing Joshua to bow down to the earth and worship him. And then the commander of the Lord says to Joshua, take off your sandals, for you are standing on holy ground. Joshua knew immediately when he said that because Joshua had heard Moses tell him that story about the burning bush when they were wandering in the wilderness, hearing that stories of those things. So Joshua knew what was going on there, and Joshua obeyed and submitted. So Joshua is his goal is it's a 7 year campaign. Joshua is a military commander, as we see. Moses couldn't do what Joshua needed to do. Moses lost he could have, but he lost that um, leadership that God had given him because he disobeyed when he struck the rock. But Joshua and Caleb were the only two that survived from the original wandering. And so Joshua is a military commander, and he is going to lead a 7 year campaign. And he's going to lead a 7 year campaign against 7 kingdoms. There were originally 10. And the interesting thing is, and I'll bring this up again, in the Hebraic mindset, prophecy is pattern. It's not like the Greeks where prophecy is like linear. It's not like that in the Hebraic mindset. It's pattern. So there's a 7 year campaign against 7 nations of an original 10. Daniel talks about this alliance of nations that happens in the end times that will match this. And in the book of Revelation, as we get a little bit further, we'll see that there were 10 initially, but three of the heads get cut off. So then it's against 7 nations, just like Joshua, and it's a 7 year campaign. The 70th week of Daniel, or the tribulation, whatever you want to call it, is a 7 year campaign with the Antichrist basically doing damage to the earth. And then Jesus will come back and consume him at the end of this, as we'll see as we get further in the study. So the interesting thing about Joshua, in Joshua, they completely ignored the Torah. They ignored the Sabbath, and the Levites were involved in the Battle of Jericho. Only time that ever happened that the Levites went to war was because if you remember when God commanded Moses that the Levites would not go to war. It was not their position. But in this one case, God changes everything. So you can imagine, so the angel of the Lord appears to Joshua there. We got that encounter going on, and Jesus is there. And Joshua's like expecting some great battle plan to be given to him. Can you imagine? I'd like to have been there when Jesus told Joshua what he's going to do. Because Jesus told Joshua, hey, what you're going to do is you're going to march around the city of Jericho once a day. You're going to be quiet, though, the whole time, but you're going to march around it once a day. And you're going to do this for 6 days, once a day. And on the 7th day, you're going to march around it 7 times. You're still going to be quiet the whole time. And then when you circle it the 7th time, you're going to shout and blow trumpets. And can you imagine what Joshua was thinking when what kind of battle plan? Joshua's a military commander, and you're telling me and you can imagine, if you've seen VeggieTales and some of these things, you've seen the way they mock them when they're walking around the city. You could imagine the people of Jericho mocking them the whole time they were doing that. Well, we have to ask the question, who really fought the Battle of Jericho because of that? Did Joshua and the Israelites really fight the battle?
I always taught.
I know we were, but did they have to do any fighting at all? Because what happened? They walked around on that 7th time, blew the trumpets, and the walls came tumbling down and killed the people in Jericho. And Rahab and her family was saved. And it's interesting Because do you remember it says when they are, am I remembering it wrong? Is that what you're saying? I'm not remembering it wrong. So what's interesting, when Moses sent out the people to spy the land, he sent out 12, and Joshua and Caleb were among them. Well, they came back with a Joshua and Caleb came back with a good report, if you remember, and then the rest of them came back with a bad report. And so because of that, they got to wander the wilderness for 40 years, 40 years. So now Joshua probably learned from that. It's like Moses sent in 12, and 12 couldn't give a good report. He said, I'm going to send in two. So he only sent in two spies. But were they really spies? What were they there for? Were they there to spy things? 40 years ago, they were there to spy out the land because Moses sent them in there to scope things out. Joshua didn't send them into that. Joshua sent in, I would call, two witnesses. Because did the two that Joshua sent in, did they bring back any military intelligence to Joshua? Not that we know of. There's no account of that in that story in Joshua. But what they did do is they did find Rahab. Sorry about that interruption.
I like the commercial break.
All right. So, yeah, Pam reminded me of something I left out too. So I'm gonna start with that. So, you remember as kids we sing these songs. Go, Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. But Joshua fought the battle of Jericho. That crazy song. Well, it's actually, we learned that in Sunday school, but it's actually false. Joshua didn't fight any battle of Jericho. Joshua fought the battle of Ai and lost. And Joshua fought the battle of Beth Horon and won, but he did not fight the battle of Jericho. That was all the Lord that fought that battle. But anyway, that's kind of what my point was here in Joshua 6, that Joshua didn't do anything. He walked around the city and didn't make any noise. And then on that seventh day, after that circling at that seventh time, they shouted and blew those trumpets, and the walls came down. So the Battle of Jericho is complete. The Battle of Jericho gives us a glimpse of the book of Revelation, but it's not complete because, and it's not a perfect picture either. It's not a perfect match. So some people would probably argue with me and again tell me I'm being heretical trying to overlap them. But I think if you take Hebraic pattern as prophecy, then it fits in a lot of ways because of, so Jericho happens, they win big, Jesus wins. Then they get in the big battle that Joshua and his people do fight is called the Battle of Beth Horon. And the Battle of Beth Horon is what's told in, I think mainly in Joshua, it's up through Joshua 10, I believe. Let's see, let me find it. Actually, yeah, I think it's through 12. I think right there, somewhere in there is where they say rocks fall on us and cry out. But there was an enemy confederation under a leader in Jerusalem. And the same thing is going to happen during the tribulation. There will be an enemy confederation that will be led by a leader. We'll call him the Antichrist or Mr. Big Mouth or lots of other names you can call him. But the enemies that were confederated in Joshua were under a leader named Adonai-Zedek. And his name meant the Lord of Righteousness, which was blasphemous because he was bad. And so I think, again, there are patterns, there's types, and so there's similarities. And so these enemies in Joshua that after Jericho and after Ai, the Battle of Beth Horon, the enemies are defeated with hailstones and fire from heaven, it tells us in Joshua. You probably read that, Karen, when you were reading the sections in Joshua that I had you read. And there were also signs in the sun and the moon, because you remember and y'all all probably remember this. This is where the sun basically, it didn't really stand still in the sky, but it appeared to slow down because because the sun is not, moving around the earth, obviously. I know some people that are flat earthers try to say but it's not. But anyway, the um, Earth's orbit or rotation was slowed down. And that's what I had mentioned before about that close flyby by with Mars, that it would affect the Earth's rotation. It would have been the perfect time, and it lines up with this time period. And it would have also make sense that hailstones of fire from heaven and those things, because of it being so close, would bring all kinds of debris with it. Now, God could have done it anyway, and he may not have done it that way, but there's pretty good evidence that I've talked about before that Mars and the Earth used to have different orbits than they do now. But at the end of that, the kings hide in caves and say rocks fall on us, because they didn't say hide us from the wrath of the Lamb, but they basically said rocks fall on us because they were terrified of what was coming at them from the heavens. And so what happens in Joshua is a prelude to establishing a new monarchy. Well, what happens in the book of Revelation during the tribulation is a prelude to reestablishing the Davidic monarchy, which Christ will be the ultimate ruler of. The interesting thing, too, about Joshua, and it'll tie into Revelation at the end, is that Moses talked about this Jubilee year thing in the Torah, but they never celebrated a Jubilee. The first Jubilee was celebrated when Joshua began his conquest. That was the first Jubilee year. So people going trying to calculate Jubilees, all you got to do is go figure out when the conquest happened, and you can figure out when the very first Jubilee was. And then you can figure out how to calculate when the 70th Jubilee is. And then you can probably figure out when the rapture is going to happen, or the second coming. But the thing about the Jubilee year, all debts are forgiven. The land returns to its original owners, and slaves go free. Well, when they weren't in the land, it makes sense they wouldn't celebrate the Jubilee year, because they weren't in the land. They didn't have land to return to original owners or any of that stuff. But the whole purpose of the Jubilee year was so that the slaves go free. And the Jubilee year, a lot of Christians don't know much about it, but they might know it from the book of Acts. Peter calls it the time of the restitution of all things. That will be the final Jubilee year. That will be probably around the second coming, because when the restoration of all things happens, Peter says, in the restoring of all things that were perverted by sin, removing all the slavery of sin, and delivering of the creation from the bondage of the corruption it was subjected to because of man's fall. And the interesting thing about the Jubilee year, Jewish New Year always begins on Rosh Hashanah, but a Jubilee year is different. Jubilee years, just to give you the context, they're every 50 years or every 40. Well, so every 7 years they have a Sabbath for the land. So 7 years, 7 years, 7 years. They have to let the land lay fallow for 7 years. That's what got them in trouble and got them kicked out of the land when they went into captivity in Babylon. But it's every 7 years, but so every seven in the 49th year. Well, the next year, so basically you have a Sabbath year, and then you have a Jubilee year right next to it. So the 50th year is a Jubilee year. But the Jubilee year, unlike the other years, does not begin on Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year, which is strange. It actually begins on Yom Kippur. And Yom Kippur is the holiest day on the Jewish calendar. The Yom Kippur is the only day of the year that the high priest can go into the temple, into the Holy of Holies, and put a sacrifice on the Ark of the Covenant. The only time on Yom Kippur. And the Jubilee year begins on Yom Kippur. So it's rather strange the way the Jewish years work and the way the Jubilee works. And the Jubilee has lots of prophetic implications, and we'll talk about it more as we get a little later in the study, but I wanted to bring it up here because the very first time it was celebrated was when Joshua took over the land. All right, so back to Revelation. And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer. And there was given to him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar which is before the throne. Now, I meant to put a diagram in here, and I failed to, so I'll make sure to put one in for next time, and I'll show it at the beginning. But what John's seeing here is the tabernacle that's in heaven. Because you remember when Moses created the tabernacle, God showed him the tabernacle in heaven. It was a picture of what is in heaven. So there's a tabernacle, not a temple, but a tabernacle in heaven. And in that tabernacle, there's an Ark of the Covenant. There's all these things just like the ones on the earth. And there's a golden altar. And the golden altar is known as the altar of incense. It's not in the Holy of Holies. The only thing, because you remember the altar of incense, they would go before that and offer incense on a daily basis. And they're only allowed to go in the Holy of Holies one day a year. So the golden altar is outside of the Holy of Holies. And the old golden altar is where they would offer incense. So this is a picture that John is seeing of the tabernacle in heaven. So the golden altar is there, and this is where the prayers of the saints are being offered up as like a fragrance to God. And the prayers of all the saints were upon the golden altar. And I don't know if that just means the saints during the tribulation, or if that all means literally all the saints, including the church. Our prayers from we have been praying our whole lives. And the smoke of the incense, it said, came up in the prayers of the saints and ascended before God out of the angel's hand. So all of these prayers come before God. And you remember where we left off in Revelation 7, the tribulation saints were crying out for God to bring judgment and destroy those that had martyred them, like the saints have cried in the broken world. And it's going to begin here. So in Revelation 8, we talk about these angels, this right here, and another angel here, this word, another, the second word here in the sentence, is we have to know the Greek that we're looking at. The another that we have here, there's two Greek words for another. So it's not like English, where another is easy. It's just another, what? I need another pencil. Well, do you need another pencil because you broke your pencil? Or do you need another pencil because you don't like your pencil? Or do you need a different kind of pencil? Those kinds of things. So in the Greek, there are two words clearly defined what these words are. There's heteros, which is another of a different kind, meaning I want something different. And there's allos, which is of the same kind. And the reason I bring this up and the reason it's important is because of what it says here. And another angel came and stood at the altar having a golden censer. Because if we look here, where was it? Where was the first one? No, that's fine. So another angel, because some people say that they try to say this is Jesus here that stood before the altar, and Jesus is not an angel. And because notice here it says another, and as I said, the Greek word is another of the same kind. Well, there's only one Jesus, so this is not Jesus. This is not the devil. It's none of that stuff. It's an angel. We take it at face value because these are the same kind of angels it's talking about in the earlier parts of Revelation. Well, you're going to see another word for angel in a minute in this section that is not an angel, but these are actually angels that we're looking at. So another angel came and stood at the altar, having the golden incense, and the angel took the censer. Check out what the angel did. The angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar and cast it into the earth. And there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake. This is like serious business now. So judgment is like really ramping up here, and the seven angels, which had the seven trumpets, prepared themselves to sound. So the seventh seal is broken. There's silence. All these things start happening. The angel takes the censer, fills it with fire from the altar of God, and throws it at the earth. And there's mass chaos now going on the earth at a new level. Now, some people like to say, too, that this is when Satan fell. And I don't think this is when Satan fell either. And this could be have something to do with that, but I don't think that it does. Because the angel is I don't know exactly what he's throwing at the earth. I don't know. We won't know. It's just pure speculation. So I'm gonna choose not to speculate because I don't know. So we get to the trumpets now. So the first angel sounds the trumpet, and then there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth. Now it's getting serious. And look what it says. And a third part of the trees were burned up, and all of the green grass was burned up. Not some, but all. So this is a judgment on the vegetation on the earth. Look at that. A third part of the trees get destroyed in the whole world, and all the grass. Can you imagine in like one instance some judgment coming and all the grass on the whole planet being gone? How barren the earth would look. It would start to look like a desert. But that's what happens. The first angel does his judgment. A third of the trees and the grass is all, and the grass is all grass is burned. Okay. The second angel now sounds, and there was a great mountain burning with fire that was cast into the sea, and a third part of the sea became blood. Well, and it says a third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and a third part of the ships were destroyed. My guess is what this is, because of the way it describes it, a great mountain burning with fire cast into the sea. I could see a huge meteor crashing into the earth because it would cause this kind of destruction that we're seeing, where it'll kill all the a third of the life in the sea and destroy all these ships. So I could see certainly this kind of thing happening from, and the interesting thing is, not too long ago, it's kind of funny, they have all this technology to detect these near Earth asteroids. And not too long ago, a asteroid, it was dark. The asteroid it had what's called a very low albedo, like Mars's moons. And so it didn't emit a lot of light. And so they didn't see it in time. Well, it passed between the Earth and the moon, and it was the size of Mount Everest. So they missed it completely and didn't know that it was there until it was gone. They detected it after it had already left. So where God is protecting the world at this point, obviously, and our technology can't save us from it when it comes. I know man thinks he can save himself, but he's going to find out real quick that there's things in the universe that way more powerful than him. And so I can see something like this happening, this huge meteor hitting the earth, because a meteor is most likely what created the Gulf of Mexico and what caused, probably happened during the flood, and probably what caused an ice age and some other things that have happened. So there's lots that can happen with these things. When you take a meteor of that size hitting the earth, it causes a mass extinction event. You can model these things on a computer. I've played with some of that in the past. So the second trumpet is a mountain of fire, and it destroys a third of life in the sea. Okay? Third trumpet sounds. Third trumpet sounds, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell on a third part of the rivers and upon the fountains of the water. And some people try to say this too, this star falling is Satan, because sometimes angels are compared to stars, but you see the word angel there and you see the word star there. They're different words in this context. So I don't think you can say that's an angel either. So the star falls from heaven, and I don't believe it's an actual star. That would be silly. And again, it looked like a star to John. But this object, it says, fell from heaven. It was burning as it were a lamp, and it fell on a third part of the rivers and upon the fountains of the waters. And the name of the star is called wormwood. And a third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters because they were made bitter. Now, some people try to allegorize this and say this is like false teaching and bad doctrine, but like they literally say that this is not real. It's just spiritual. It's just bad teaching and bad doctrine or bitter. That's not what it's saying here. Many men died of the waters. I think that's literal because they were made bitter. Well, the interesting thing about this word wormwood, and I looked it up because I wanted to make sure I was correct before I said it. Because the word wormwood, it does mean bitter waters. We translate it's a, but the actual uh, word means to become undrinkable without harm. It's where we get the Greek word absinthe here. Well, the interesting thing as well that wormwood, if you take the word Chernobyl, and this is what I looked up because I had heard some people say it, but they said they had never verified it. They just had heard it was true. So, I'm going to look it up and check it out. And so I did a little research on it. And the word Chernobyl in Russian, if you translate it, means wormwood. Now, I don't think Chernobyl was this, but remember what Chernobyl did to the waters around there. It made them undrinkable without harming you because of the radiation in the water. And so I think that, it's a picture of what's to come. Revelation chapter 8, the word wormwood, it's synonymous with sorrow, calamity, hemlock, bitterness. Could be figurative. Some references in John, references in Psalms, but it's most likely literal. And you have literal verses that use that same Hebrew word in Ezekiel and Jeremiah. But the Russian word wormwood, for wormwood, is Chernobyl. I did confirm that, which I found interesting. Well, if we think about those waters being turned bitter, it says a third of the waters turned bitter. Well, what the National Geographic Society said is there's about 100 rivers in the world, principal rivers. So 33% of those rivers 33 of those rivers become bitter and undrinkable. Imagine what that does to the population. And then in the U.S., there's 30 large rivers. So a third of those become bitter. You can just imagine what this does to the ecosystem and to the people. I mean, you can't drink the water. What are you going to do? Now, the star falling from heaven, I don't think it's Satan. Some people think it is. If you want to go study that, here's some verses for you. Go read Isaiah 14 and go read Ezekiel 28 side by side. Read them together. Compare them. And see what you think about it. Now, there is an angel of the Abuso, but that will come out of the Abuso that we'll see in a minute. But that angel will be imprisoned there. He doesn't rule the Abuso, just like the devil. People have a dumb view of hell. They think that the devil is going to run hell. The devil's not going to run hell. The devil's going to be being tormented just like everyone else that goes there. It's crazy that people think that the devil's going to run hell or something. The devil is a created being, and it says, Jesus said that hell wasn't created for man, though man will go there if they reject the gospel. But he says hell was created for the devil and his angels for punishment, for torment. So at some point, Satan he did fall. We know he fell. We're going to see it in Revelation. It's going to replay his fall. Jesus talks about his fall. But at some point, he loses access. He lost access to the third heaven when he fell. But he will lose complete access to the heavens at some point when he's cast down to the earth. And we'll see this as we get further into Revelation. But you can go check that out. Now, the demon thing, I'm going to hold off on the Nephilim demon discussion tonight. But I will make a quick mention that there's so many people in the church that think demons and fallen angels are the same thing. They are not. A fallen angel can take on bodily form. They can appear as a human. They can appear as animals even. They can appear as other things. So they are able to manifest as a physical being. A demon cannot. because we see demons when Jesus deals with them in the New Testament. Demons are evil spirits. They have to request to possess something. They have to have embodiment. Jesus, when Jesus lets them go into the pigs, they had to make a request. They have to obey Christ. So they're destined for torment, just like the fallen angels are, but they're different entities, and I'll deal with them a little later time. But I have a thought on what they are, but I'm gonna save it for the time being. So the third trumpet is wormwood, and a third of the waters become bitter. And then the fourth angel sounds his trumpet, and a third part of the sun was smitten, and so that they were darkened, so that the day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise. Now, I don't think that this literally means that it could be that the sun will be smitten. What I think it means is if you think about this meteor hitting the earth and the cataclysm it's going to cause on the earth and the ash that it's going to put in the air and the dust and the volcanic activity that's going to set off, that's going to cause even more. It's going to create a semblance of a nuclear winter. So, and it says a day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise. It could be something else, but I don't know. But I suspect that it has to do with the other judgment that has caused this to happen. But it could be that he does something to the sun. He definitely could, because he does do something to the sun later. So maybe. And here's the interesting thing, how Revelation 8 ends. And I behold, and I heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, by reason of the other voices of the trumpets of the three angels which are yet to sound. Now, the only other place we see in the Bible when something's said three times, the only place I can remember, is holy, holy, holy. When we're talking about we're just talking about the Trinity, but it's also talking about the majesty of God. Well, it's interesting. Woe, woe, woe. Three woes being repeated like this. And it says an angel flying through the midst of heaven. Well, this word that we translate angel in the English, not angel. It's actually eagle. It's aidos. So it's not angelos like we see in the other verses where angel is mentioned. I don't know why they translated it this way, but it is actually eagle. So eagle's crying out with a loud voice, and he's warning the inhabitants of the earth because of the three trumpets that are yet to sound. And I think the woe, 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 I think it's the three judgments, because we've had four trumpets and we got three left. So I believe that the three woes, because he said they haven't come yet. He said, woe, 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 by reason of these three trumpets that are yet to sound. So I believe that he's warning that this thing's about to ramp up big time, and that's what the three woes are that we see in chapter 9. So that brings us to the end of chapter 8. Okay, chapter 9. So, and the fifth angel sounded. So we started chapter 9, and I saw a star fall from heaven. We keep seeing these stars fall. This star, though, I believe may actually be an angel, and it could be Satan. But it says, I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him, that means it can't be an actual literal star, because this is the first time it gets personified. It's a him. So unto him was given a key of the bottomless pit. So whoever this entity is that's just been cast out of heaven, he's given a key to the bottomless pit. So on his own, then he, that star that fell, opened the bottomless pit, and there arose smoke out of the pit, and the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and they were given power as scorpions of the earth have power. So him, as I mentioned, and given, mentioned twice. So I don't think this is a literal star that we're looking at. This is some type of angelic being, or fallen angel is more like it, is what it is. And could be Satan. This could be when he actually gets thrown out. We'll see a reference to it again later, but this very well could be when he gets thrown out, because then he gets to unlock the pit and let the demons of hell out. And it was commanded them, so he lets these things out. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men who did not have the seal of God in their foreheads. Who had the seal of God in their foreheads? You remember who was sealed back? I shouldn't ask you a question. So if you remember back in Revelation 7, God sealed 144,000 Jewish evangelists. These are the ones he's saying. They have the seal of God. They're the only ones that are sealed. Everyone else is not protected in the tribulation, just these 144,000. So they are immune to the torment of these beings. And you can see that it says they have the power as a scorpion, and the earth has power. So these things, they're locusts, because it says they're locusts upon the earth, but they have the power of a scorpion. So you can imagine these creatures, and they come out of this abusa, or this bottomless pit, but they're commanded not to hurt the grass. So that's interesting, because locusts eat grass. So they're not really locusts, because some people say they're locusts, or some people say they're UN helicopters or military helicopters or whatever else. They're none of that. They're beings from the abusa. They're angelic or some type of fallen angel or some kind of creature from the heavenly realms. So neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men who have not the seal of God in their foreheads. And look what it says. And to them it was given that they should not kill them. So they can torment men, but they can't kill them. And it says they should torment them for 5 months. And their torment was as that of the scorpion when it strikes a man, but it'll be magnified 100-fold of what a scorpion would be. It says, in those days men will seek to die and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. Now, this is an interesting verse, because if you think about it, they seek death and can't find it. What does that mean? They try to kill themselves and they just mutilate themselves and just suffer? What does it mean? Or is it just idiomatic, saying it's so bad, they want to try to find any way they can to die? But it sure sounds like, from the way it reads, they desire to die, but death will actually flee from them. So their spirit will refuse to leave their body, is kind of the way I've seen it projected. Don't know. But 5 months is interesting, because there's only one other place in the Bible there's a 5-month period of judgment, and that was Noah's flood. It was 150 days, 5 months, which is interesting. But they seek death and not find it. I don't know what to do with that verse. I've seen some movies and books how they say, people jump off a building and can't die and all this. I don't know. I mean, I have no idea. But I would not want to be here. It's going to be hell on earth. And the shapes of the locusts were like horses, prepared unto battle, and on their heads were, as it were, crowns like gold, and their faces were as faces of men, and they had hair as the hair of a woman, and their teeth were as teeth of lions. And they had a breastplate, as it were, breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle. Now, these are not locusts. We already established that. Says they had the shape of a locust. Didn't say they were locusts. They had the shape of a locust, and they were like unto horses. Have you ever seen a Middle Eastern locust? If you ever look it up, I should have had a picture of one. I meant to put one in here. But if you look at a Middle Eastern locust, they don't look like our locusts. They look like a dang miniature horse. It's crazy. You look at one, they look like a dang horse. So anyway, even natural locusts have the appearance of a horse equipped with this armor. The Middle Eastern ones do. And the German term for locust is actually translates to hay horse. And the Italian term for locust means little horse. So even the languages embrace that these things look like horses. Ours over here aren't really locusts. That's why they don't look like horses. And I read that verse already. And they had tails like unto scorpions, and there was stings in their tails, and the power was to hurt men for 5 months. And they had a king over them. Oh, really? They had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, who in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath the name Apollyon. So there is some being that's in this bottomless pit that got put in there that is the king over them. And then it says, one woe is past. So remember the three woes? One woe is past. Behold, there are two more woes to come hereafter. But back to this real quick. They had a king over them. Well, there's a weird verse in Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 30, verse 27 says, the locusts have no king, yet they go forth all of them by bands. So this says they have a king. This says locusts have no king. So these are obviously not real locusts. Well, there's another interesting verse too. If you read Amos chapter 7, verse 1, it doesn't look like much. It's a confusing verse if you read it in our modern translations, even in the King James. Thus hath the Lord showed unto me, and behold, he formed grasshoppers in the beginning of the shooting up of the latter growth. And lo, it was a latter growth after the king's mowings. What in the world does that mean? Well, I personally think it's a mistranslation. Because if you look at it in the Septuagint reads absolutely nothing close to this. Let me show you what the Septuagint says. It says, the Lord showed unto me, behold, a swarm of locusts were coming. And behold, one of the young devastating locusts was Gog the king. So Proverbs says the locusts have no king, but then Amos 7:1 tells us that these locusts, devastating locusts, have a king, and his name is Gog, which Ezekiel 38 talks about Gog when we talk about Magog. And so it's interesting. That's all. I'm just going to leave it at that, let you chew on that. Find a Septuagint and compare Amos 7:1 in your Bible to the Septuagint, and they absolutely read nothing the same. And I think the Septuagint's actually accurate. And if you look at the Septuagint, if you find a translation of it, all the texts agree. It's not like it's a variant reading. No, it's the only reading that they have, which is very strange. There's lots of strange verses in the Bible that don't make a lot of sense. All right. So the 7 trumpet judgments. So we have the 4th trumpet, the sun's darkened. The 5th trumpet, it sounds, the demon locusts. So the first woe is past, and the 6th angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the 4 horns of the golden altar, which is before God. And the golden altar is another one of those things that's in the tabernacle, saying to the 6th angel, which had the trumpet, loose the 4 angels which are bound on the great river Euphrates. It's interesting. These angels are bound at the river Euphrates. And the 4 angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year to slay a third part of men. Isn't that interesting? There is an appointed day, an exact hour when this event's going to happen. John's telling us right here, an hour, a day, a month, and a year to slay a third part of men. So this is going to be killing a third part of the population of the world that's left. You probably got 1 billion people dead by now, maybe more, but you're going to lose a lot more when this happens, and it's going to get a lot worse. There's not going to be very many people left on the earth when it's all over. So those 2 woes have passed. The Euphrates angels that kill these men. And if you think about these Euphrates angels, it's really no surprise because, and if you go read in the Old Testament, one angel slayed 175,000 Assyrians in one night. That's what it tells us. 175,000 people in one night with one angel. So it's not a problem for them to kill a third of men, these 4 angels. And then what happens, but the 2 woes have passed, but now we reach another interlude. We're going to see this interlude there's we're going to finish this section 9, but we're going to see this interlude starts in chapter 10 and goes through chapter 14. And we're not going to cover all of those next time. We're going to cover 2 of those next time, but you want to read those, read all 4 of them if you can. I'll put that up in a second. So the Euphrates, just real quick, it's the eastern boundary of Israel, according to what God said. I know the Arabs probably wouldn't, and Muslims wouldn't probably agree with that today, but one day it'll be restored. That'll be the boundary of Israel. That was what God promised them, and that's what they will have in the millennium. It's also the traditional boundary of east and west. The interesting thing is the Romans lived in constant fear of the Parthians. The Parthian Empire was on the other side of the Euphrates. And you remember when the 3 wise men came to the birth of Jesus? Well, the 3 wise men came from the Parthian Empire. So you can imagine why Rome would be terrified, because they were fearful of these people. So when this huge horde of these magi with their armies show up, you could imagine how they might feel. Also, Euphrates is referenced in the book of in Eden. It mentions it in the very beginning of Genesis. Now, it's interesting. You could go read it. I'm not going to do it tonight, but go read in the very early parts of Genesis, I think chapter 2, where 2 or 3, where it talks about Eden and the Euphrates. So you know where some of the boundaries are. So the Euphrates is in Mesopotamia. Well, the Garden of Eden was east of Eden, right? So the Eden must have been because west of Eden would be the Garden of Eden, based on what it says. So to the east, Jerusalem probably is where Eden was. So sin began at the Euphrates, Genesis 2, because that's where they fell, because they were in the garden, and the first murder and all these things happened. Nimrod shows up here in Mesopotamia. Tower of Babel is in Mesopotamia. False worship, idolatry, all this stuff starts here. And the number of the army of the horses, the horsemen, I'm talking about these demon horsemen that came out from those trumpets, number 200,000. That's 200 million. Just didn't have a way to write 200 million, but that was 200 million. And I heard the number of them. Now, some people say this is a Chinese army. I don't think it is a Chinese army, because look what it says. I saw the horses in the vision. So I guess John is having a vision here. And them that sat on them, having breastplates of fire and jacinth and brimstone. This is probably talking about colors, like light, because these were usually, when you see stones, they usually represent light, colors of light. So I don't think they're a Chinese army. Yes, China can field a 200 million man army now, but I don't think that's what this is talking about. I think this is all supernatural things going on. I don't think it's natural in any stretch, because it says that they had breastplates of fire, and the heads of the horses were as the heads of lions, and out of their mouth came fire and smoke and brimstone. Yeah, some people say they're tanks, but I don't think so. I used to think that, but I'm like, I'm going to take the Bible literally. I don't need to. I've seen some crazy stuff, and read about some crazy stuff people have seen, so I have no problem that these things actually exist. By these 3 were a third part of men killed by the fire and the smoke and the brimstone which issued out of their mouths. So check it out, that the third of men are killed. And we talked about those men being killed by the angels being bound at the Euphrates. So that kills a third of men. This kills another third of men. And out of the power of their mouth and their tails, for their tails were like unto serpents, and they had heads with which they did harm. These things are bad news. And the rest of men, which were not killed by the plagues. This blows my ever-loving mind right here. And the rest of the men, which were not killed by the plagues, yet repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship devils and idols of gold and silver and brass and stone and wood, which can neither see nor hear nor walk. Neither repented they of their murders, nor their sorceries, nor their fornication, nor their thefts. So all of this judgment coming upon the world, people dying. They've seen the rapture. They've seen all these things happen. They probably explained the rapture away at that point, but they've seen all of these events transpire, yet they still don't repent. And the characteristics of the day, your murders. Well, we subsidize murders rather than doing it the way they used to do it in the old days. We instead of putting a baby or a child in a statue of Molech and burning it, we kill it in the Holy of Holies of the mother's womb. And even pagan cultures, if you go back and study them, they never aborted babies. That was a capital crime in pagan empires. So it was not allowed. So even pagan cultures, it was illegal because they considered it an abomination in their cultures because they saw the children as their future military. And so killing them was a capital crime, which blows my ever-loving mind. So murders, which we have rampant in our world today. Sorcery. Pharmakia is the word actually used there. So drugs. And the interesting thing is, I won't go into this tonight. I won't get political, but I will make one mention here that the largest constituency in Washington, D.C. today in lobby groups is the pharmaceutical industry. And the pharmaceutical industry is manipulating our government officials with their power. And that is exactly what this is. More of the pharmaceutical industry with their drugs, their pharmakia. Fornication. Well, we obviously know about fornication. We don't need to talk about that because porn is like America's the porn capital of the world, and sex trafficking and all this other stuff. So that stuff's characteristic today. You can imagine what it's going to be like during the tribulation. And then theft. But we're not just talking about like people robbing people. We're talking about institutional theft. Companies defrauding people and, Enron and all this other stuff. Now, I'm going to not go through this. You can review this at your own leisure about the plagues of Egypt, but the plagues have parallels to these judgments as well. And I've got these kind of noted here and how they line up with the book of Revelation if you want to compare them at some point. So I'm not going to go through that in the interest of time. If we take Exodus versus Revelation, Jacob's trouble, we talked about that. The time of Jacob's trouble, Isaiah 60 and then Jeremiah 30 talk about it, or what's known as the 70th week of Daniel, tribulation, whatever you want to call it, or the time of Jacob's trouble. It's had all those names. They cry out to God in Jeremiah 31. So at some point, and Zechariah mentions as well, they will cry out to God. And when they cry out to God, he will hear them and he will destroy their enemies. God will command oppressors and let them go. And then there will be two witnesses, just like we saw with Joshua. And these two witnesses we're going to see in Revelation 11 coming up. They will do miracles before their enemies, just like Moses and Joshua did. Moses and Aaron did before Pharaoh. They were two witnesses before Pharaoh. So there's lots of parallels. And again, I'll let you read through the Exodus parallels because there are quite a few of them. If you go look here, I've got parallels for the tie Revelation directly back into the plagues of Egypt with verses from Revelation. So you can go look at these, Revelation 7, 8, 12, 16. So you can jump through all of these. They all have parallels in this. And I'll mention a little bit of this as we get a little in Revelation 16 and some of those other chapters later on. But you should have those slides as well because I did send those out, Karen. I think did you get them?
Yes, I have them.
I'll ask you in just a second. That's okay. So here we have where we stand with the seven trumpets now. We're right in this next pause where we're going to have a 4-chapter pause. What we're going to see is we're going to see really a 5-chapter pause. We're going to see chapter 10. We're going to see chapter 11 next time. And we're going to see the angel with the book and the 2 witnesses. Really interesting, cool stuff. And I'll talk about the temple in that section. And then we're going to, chapter 12, I may do that as one separate session because it's important, but we'll see. I may do 12. Yeah, I probably will do it separate because the beasts need to be separate from that. 12 is a summary of Israel and the history of Israel. So I'll go through that. And then the 2 beasts, and then the harvest in chapter 14. And then if you go into Revelation, if you go past the parenthetical pause, it says the second woe is past, and behold, the third woe comes quickly, suddenly. And then the 7th angel sounded, and there was a great voice in heaven saying, the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. And the 24 elders who sat before the seats fell on their faces and worshiped God. And that's where we are headed. Because when that 7th trumpet sounds, it will quickly lead to the 7 bowl judgments that we see here. And these 7 bowls of wrath will be poured out, and it will be wrath like you've never seen before. It will ramp things up off the chart compared to what we've seen. And we'll start seeing those in Revelation 16. So we're not going to see those for a few times. We're going to go through our next section and our pauses. I recommend reading chapter 10 and 11 before our next session. Who are the 2 witnesses? Ask yourself that question. Yeah, so I'm curious. Be really curious who you think the 2 witnesses are. People have lots of theories on who they are. I don't have any idea, but who are they? And then finally, why were the 7 thunders not recorded? You'll see that when you read chapter 11. But think about it. Why were they not recorded? And read the whole thing, 10 and 11, and think about the whole, why did he even tell us that he told it not to write it down? It's interesting. We can have some interesting discussion on it. But that's all I have. I did go a little bit over, but we did have that interruption because of the dumb network knocking us off. So